Dr. Shannon. Welcome back to the show.
So honored to be back on your amazing podcast and just adore you so much. So thanks for having me back on.
Yes, so fun. Okay, so we had you on probably like 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a minute. So why don't we do like a little reintroduction to who are you and what do you do?
So my background, I'm an entrepreneur, like from birth, out of the womb, very unemployable. I've had my own businesses all my life. Even in high school, I created like a business within the high school where people could buy things. So it's in my blood. And just like everyone that's probably listening to this, I hit somewhat of an entrepreneur glass ceiling, just that plateau that you don't seem to be able to pass, whether it's 1 or 2 clients or even 5 figures, but not being able to get to the next level. And it was driving me crazy, right? Because I had this big vision, big dream. I know you're this way too. And I know your listeners must be as well, where we're ambitious, we're driven, we want to honor God, we want to, live to the full potential that we have. And so I did what every, struggling entrepreneur naturally does. I'm just kidding. But I really tried to figure out my brain and was in a moment with a mentor that I realized the only thing different between her and I was the way she thought. She thought differently in literally every area: money, worth, ability, possibility, like every single area. And I thought, wow, if that's the only thing standing in the way of me being at my fullest capacity, I got to figure out how to think differently. So I just followed that rabbit trail in an obsessive kind of way and ended up getting a PhD in neuropsychology, studying,
as one does,
because I always say the DR stands for desperate enough to figure my own self out. But
hilarious.
I went into that really trying to understand how God wired our brains to be successful and how to remove the limitations, because intuitively I knew I was holding myself back. Like intuitively I knew my thinking, which was presented in my own thought, my own mind, was the thing that kept catapulting me back. So I really wanted to understand, how did successful people, what did their brain patterns look like, and what is the brain pattern of those of us who were stuck and struggling solopreneurs, and how can we tap into that? And what I discovered really was kind of funny. I was the only believer and the only entrepreneur in those rooms.
Wow.
So it was like foreign, like mission trips feel very tame compared to my PhD, because I was watching scripture come alive, because God created the brain, right? And then the brain was discovered by scientists, but God is the originator. He created our brain for us to be able to operate and gave us the manual, which is scriptures. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But so I kept popping off with, oh my gosh, that's in Ephesians. Oh my gosh, that's in Romans. And most of the people and professors were atheist or agnostic to some level. And so they couldn't wait. They kept telling me to simmer down. And the interesting thing, Rachel, was, the science behind the brain, everybody kind of stays in their own lane. Like if you're learning, synaptic pruning, which is kind of the process of removing limitations or removing faulty patterns, they didn't want to combine that with the ability to work with the subconscious, or the ability to build a pathway in the brain toward a new result. And that was what they couldn't wait to get me out of the rooms, because I was raising my hand and saying, well, wait a minute, could we remove limiting beliefs and therefore, be able to have this neuroplasticity toward where we're headed? And they're just like, stay in the lane you're in. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to solve me. Like, entrepreneurs, that's what we do. We solve problems. And so really in that experience, I, through science, through scripture, created a model called the Neuro Coach model that allows us to regain our birthright, regain the control of the operating system of our brain, which operates everything we do. It's how we create more time. It's what we do with our time. It's how we create more money. It's how we have a relationship. God gave us this beautiful tool and a manifesto on how to use it. And when learning the brain science of it and just starting to put these pieces in a different puzzle, it started really unleashing me and my business. My business, which was on a big plateau, started literally, it felt like overnight, it was about 67 days. It started really, really growing. And I'm like, okay, I'm not a snowflake. I'm not a special unicorn. I'm just a girl with a vision and a dream. And I was stuck. And so the 10 or so clients that I had at the time that I was business coaching with, I asked them, hey, I have this model, this brain science model that I believe is the difference or the linchpin between where you are and where you want to go, because business coaching is a lot of strategy, and then you're coaching around blocks, but you're really not using a tool that can remove them, right? And so we started using the Neuro Coach model as I was coaching one-on-one, and I had one of my clients within about 72 days his business was stuck at that high six-figure mark. And within 62 days, he was at 8 figures in his business.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's the one thing that's funny, because when we're struggling, when we're hustling, we look at people who have it, or 7 and 8 figures, and we say, oh, I've got to do their strategy. I got to do their tactic. I got to do the new AI thing. I've got to chase this. I've got to chase that. Let's learn, because we're looking at the outside, assuming that the outside is what's making their 7 figures or 8-figure business work. And it's the one thing, like I said, the thinking, that one thing that shifts everything. And so that's me. That was a long introduction, but that's what I get to do. I coach entrepreneurs and help them unlock that part of themselves that allows success to happen, remove the blocks that you didn't even choose to begin with, and then automate that, put it on autopilot in your subconscious so that you can easily get to where you're going. So we do that, and we certify coaches as well in the model, because in reality, you're not a coach unless you're getting results and transformation for people. And so we teach them how to actually do that the right way.
So cool. Okay. How did God wire our brains?
I love this. So when you look through scripture, this is what I always say. I learned so much in those PhD rooms that had nothing to do with actual science. But when you look at you hear, I don't know if you follow Joyce Meyer or anybody who does, renewing the mind or the brain, all the mind kind of sermons and that kind of thing. We tend to grab onto certain scriptures, right? Renew the mind and continue to renew the mind. That's one. Or to think on what is good, true, pure, and lovely. Well, what God did in his infinite wisdom is he put in scriptures in order exactly what we need to do in order to wire our brain. So how did he wire our brain? He gave us this system called the subconscious. And the best way for me to describe what that is, because certainly the woo world has taken it to a place that it never was intended to be, nor is it factual. So the subconscious's job, God created that to make it super automated for us to do the things that he's called us to do. So let me unpack that a little bit for you. So we think about 60,000 thoughts per day. So if we actually had to think every single thought with the glucose in our prefrontal cortex, this is where we have our thinking brain. If we had to actually think all those thoughts, we would not get out of bed. We wouldn't have the energy. Even as it is, 3/4 of the energy that we use on a daily basis is used in our brain, not in our body. So God created this system that automated and fires the thought without your knowledge or permission. Here's the key: what you repeat. Now that scripture makes sense. Think on only what is good, true, pure, lovely, praiseworthy. Why? Why did God tell us to do that? Because he knew the system that he created, it doesn't look at your future dreams or goals or visions. It doesn't look at the vision board. It only automates what gets repeated. So this repetition that, by the way, happened probably in childhood, probably in your young adulthood, right? About money, worth, enoughness, love, all of that stuff was repeated around you and is in your subconscious right now running. Get this, 90% of your daily decisions, and
Wow.
therefore your actions, and therefore your results. So God really emphasized this because nothing is more important than using that system for his will and for his good and for for his glory and for your calling, versus what the enemy wants you to use it for is for believing that you're not enough, believing that you don't have what it takes, believing that money, is evil, that it grows on, doesn't grow on trees, all the things that we heard growing up. And so the first thing that I think it's so important to understand that God wired you to be repeating what aligns with his will and aligns with your calling. And unfortunately, we are in a broken world. And I always tell people, whether you had the best family of origin environment or the worst or somewhere in between, we don't have to go back to it and snorkel through it. But what we do need to do is realize it's not our fault that the subconscious has these faulty programs going on, but it is paramount to our future that we know what is firing and remove the things that don't serve us. And that's why I love when God says renew your mind. And the scripture, that particular scripture, it says renew, the word itself, and I don't remember the exact word, but when I knew it before when I was studying, it means renew today and keep renewing. It's a word that means and in perpetuity, so to speak. So why does God tell us to do that? Because each and every day, things are getting repeated around you when you were growing up that weren't intended to be in your subconscious, right?
I literally just caught one thing. My son TJ, so he's
Yeah.
10, he's in fifth grade, and he's doing his math homework. And TJ, have you ever heard us say that in this family? And he goes, no. And I'm like, what do we say instead? Like, it's not in the budget right now. So he's literally being like programmed that at school.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off. But
I
was
love that
side note.
example because it's so subtle. And here's what I think this will set a lot of people free. When we beat ourselves up, don't we? We're like, I'm not where I want to be. I have this big dream, big vision, but it's not going fast enough. There must be something wrong with me. I must not know the right thing. I'm missing the puzzle piece, right? And we beat ourselves up over it. It has nothing to do with you knowing the right thing, having the right thing, none of that. It's just you have an automation running. So this is where I want you to have that grace over yourselves. The part of your brain that actually decides if something is true or not is that prefrontal cortex. That's why I keep doing this, because it's right behind your forehead. It doesn't fully develop till you're 21 years old. 24 for men.
Wow.
I'll leave that right there. But it explains the whole lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. But here's the thing, like, think about that. It's developing in degrees as you approach that 21 to 22-year-old place. So when you're 7, 8, 9, 12, 18, and your family of origin, environment of origin is speaking their beliefs around money, their beliefs around your worth or your lack thereof, your beliefs, you don't have the capacity in this part of your brain to say, no, I'm not going to believe that, and I'm going to repeat the opposite. And so we all come into entrepreneurship, building businesses with these automations running 90% of every decision that we make. And that's why, I don't know about you, but it feels a little bit like a tug of war a lot. Like what I want is over here, but I feel like I'm moving backwards. And that's because you have not wired your brain yet. But the subconscious system, the great news is you can remove those faulty things and you can actually automate the future. And I don't mean this on a wooey, floaty, like, automate your future. No, I mean, let's get so granular that your brain believes it so much that it's just inevitable that you see it. I feel like that honors God in a faith kind of way so much, because you're saying, God, I know I'm called here. I believe it and I see it. And I'm going to take you at your word to think on what is good, true, pure, and lovely, which is your will, your calling on my life, and get so granular with it that I can now tell my subconscious through renewing of the mind exactly what I want it to fire 90% of the time versus faulty programs that were running before that weren't my fault, nor did I choose them. And so this is the capacity that God wired us with. And it's unfortunately not many people chase this because we're taught just chase a new strategy, chase a new tactic, chase a new external solution to the business growth problem. I'll tell you a quick funny story. A friend of, I think you know him too, Bill Allen. He has 7-figure flipping, is a dear friend of mine. And I spoke at his 8-figure mastermind about a year or two ago. And I knew he had someone following me, but I didn't know who. And so I really, I spent an hour with these 8-figure real estate investors and broke down these 3 key things that you must do to up level to a 7-figure and 8-figure mindset and keep it, right? So building a pathway towards success, giving your brain something to believe, right? Removing those blocks and then putting it into automation. So subconscious training. And literally it's a step-by-step process. I don't know about you, Rachel. I know how your stuff is because I'm in it. Like you're a step-by-step girl. I'm a step-by-step girl. So I think that's why I gravitated in the mindset world toward how God created our brain and science because, well, we can go there later in your next questions, but I was in the woo world and it was, you just always felt like you were grabbing at stuff before I was a believer, and so step-by-step processes. So I'm just teaching them basically my whole program, my whole coaching program. And then I finish and everybody's writing and they're writing, asking questions. And then I'm done and claps and whatever. And then up comes Damon John. And if everybody knows who Damon John is, on the Shark Tank, he owns Fubu and about 100 other companies. He's an incredible entrepreneur, a billion-dollar entrepreneur, multi-billions probably at this point. And he's looking at me kind of like walking up and his attention is on me. Like, I'm like, oh no, what did I say? Did I mess it? Like, what's going on? And he walked like the whole time and all the way up. And then he stands at the podium and then he looks at me again. And I'm like, what did I do? And he's like, wow, I'm going to break down for you my life and how I created what I have today. But I have never heard someone break down the steps of what I did to get here like that. Like, if you do what she just told you, you will have what I have. And I was like, okay, good. I didn't offend him because I'm like, what did I have? But
he liked it.
I was like, wow. But here's the thing, like when we're struggling, we think it's a strategy, but just like Damon John knows, and like 7 and 8-figure entrepreneurs, like we know that it's really putting our energy, the majority of our energy on the mindset it takes to get there. And I just believe if you train your brain, then you don't have to work at mindset because then your brain works for you. And so that's God created. He created these 3 systems to be able to build a pathway, to remove anything that gets in the way, and to automate it so that your brain works for you as the best tool in the world to grow your business, be the best wife, be the best mom, be whatever it is that God is calling you to be.
What might that look like practically, those 3 steps?
Yeah. So the first key before anything is the removing, because here's what I know about us and people like us, which means your tribe, right? We're ambitious, we're driven. You don't have to get us going on a daily basis. You have to slow us down, but you don't have to get us going, right? We have a harder time with silence and still than we do activity, right? So your foot's on the gas. I don't really work with anybody that isn't that way because that's not who I serve, but your foot is on the gas in your life, right? These patterns that are automated in your subconscious are like having your foot on the brake at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you're going, your brain tells you that you're going, but because that foot is on the brake, it's not allowing you to go as fast, and it's taking you off course time and time again. So we always start with what we call, in our world, it's called the mind matrix, which is one of the tools within the Neuro Coach model. And it's really 4 simple steps to remove limiting beliefs permanently. And that's where results come from. When you don't have the limitations with the foot on the brake, then the gas actually works. So the first key is to recognize. You've got to hear the story that is being told, that your brain is telling you, right? Remember, you got to separate yourself from the patterns. You're not telling yourself that. It sounds like your own voice, but it's really these patterns of the past. So for an example, when you are trying to grow your business and you're starting to do things that feel uncomfortable, right? Maybe you're going live and you've never gone live before. Maybe you're doing cold calls and you've never done those before. Maybe you're, doing a launch for the first time and you've never done that before. Basically, for your brain, it's your brain is automated to here's where you're going. And in between, if you're listening to this, I'm like stretching my hands apart. If you had a rubber band in there, there'd be what? What would be there? It'd be tension, right? So we get this resistance and this tension, and we think something's wrong, and we start to play small again. Where if you can use that tension, that resistance that you feel when you're doing something that is furthering your dreams and it's not aligning with where you are, you will hear the story, because your brain is wired to deliver you the story when you get out of alignment with what is in your subconscious. So basically, when you start growing, your brain is going to serve you the automation that's already in there. I'll tell you a story that kind of illustrates this. When I met with my mentor that I told you, she thinks differently. That was the only thing that was different. She had me go to a neighborhood, that a certain house I was going to buy when my business got to 7 figures, and meet with a realtor. And I'm thinking, this is no big deal. I've driven around nice neighborhoods a ton because I'm a dreamer, right? So I'm driving around. I'm not feeling very much. It's fine. And then I start to get out and I see the realtor and I start getting all these butterflies. It's kind of shifted my energy. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I heard it. On the backs of good people who make 200,000 or more, these people get to live in these kind of houses. Mm-hmm. My family and I used to drive around on the weekends looking at nice houses, and that's what my dad would say over and over and over again. Well, guess where my business was stuck? $199,000. I'm not kidding. I would sabotage it. I would go and work on something else. I would somehow, some way cool the thermometer down to where it wouldn't go past that 200,000. Why? Because in my brain, I'm a good person. I love the Lord. I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I become a bad person that uses people on the backs of good people, right? And so it was just so clear. I'm literally shaking the man's hand and I'm hearing this. I'm like, okay. So that's what I mean about recognizing it. It's like, there's no way I'm going to grow my business if that thought is automated. I will never get past that point. And it doesn't matter if it's a different story. You just need to lean into resistance, recognize it. Number one. Number two is you got to record it. We got to get it out of the subconscious. What a lot of people do is they're like, oh, I'm going to do affirmations and I'm going to do these things, but it's like putting wet blankets on top of like a moldy thing. It doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. So are affirmations bad? No, but without removing these, you're just affirming on top of, and that's not how your brain works. It's always going to default to the subconscious. So we literally write it down on a piece of paper, not in a computer. Why? Because we're using systems that are connected to the subconscious. Your memory system is connected to your subconscious. Your physical maneuvering of your hand is part of the subconscious. And so it's a part of the automatic nerves that allow you to do it without thinking. And so as we're writing down what we heard, No one hears you have imposter syndrome. What they hear is, no one's going to believe you. You're a fraud. Or whatever it is specifically for you that you probably heard growing up. I heard a lot, don't be so big for your britches, right? Don't be so big for your britches. Like you're acting like you're more than everybody else, right? And so obviously that's going to be a tension point when I'm trying to serve. So number one, recognize. Number two, record, write it physically down on a piece of paper. And then number three, you've got to refute it. So now your thinking mind as an adult can see it on the paper. It can see it as you read it out loud. You can hear it. At one point when I was starting the podcast 7 years ago, I had a moment. I might have told this last time, but I had a moment where I thought, who's gonna, what kind of value can I bring? Right? This is coming from my past of like I have my who is connected to who I am as my identity. I was still working through that. And so I thought, what value do I bring to the podcast? And so when I wrote that down to refute it, to go after it, I had to start thinking like a lawyer would. Like when you see it on a piece of paper, it's now you can either decide. Now you have the control to say, I choose to keep this. This is good. This will get me where I want it to go. And if so, do nothing. Like get on with yourself and keep going. But if you look at this piece of paper and you're like, that statement will keep me stuck, then it's a lie, right? And this is where I believe the way God made our brains is so powerful, because we have authority to refute what the enemy meant for evil, right?
Oh, hold on. Say it again.
We have authority to refute what the enemy meant for evil. These subtle little statements, right? Through the mouth of a parent or a sibling or a teacher when you were growing up, were meant for evil. It was meant to have you start to rehearse it, and then it becomes part of your subconscious, and then you never fully live up to your calling. It's so subtle, but he does nothing different from the garden. He just lies, right? And so you've got a lie sitting there on that paper, and you become the lawyer. You come up with all the logical evidence that it is a lie, and you write down, just keep writing it down as much as you can. So now your prefrontal cortex is doing what it's been designed to do, to decide who you're going to serve. He says, this day I'm going to serve the Lord. So serving the Lord means you don't believe in the lies, that you don't hold space for the lies, that you take that authority back. So as you're writing all of in my podcast example, like, oh my gosh, I've helped so many entrepreneurs. I always serve from the heart. Like just writing down all the evidence in the scenario you're looking at, evidence outside of the scenario you're looking at, because what we're trying to do is break the glucose bond that is in the subconscious. Not to get real sciencey on you, but thoughts are just glucose, they're energy. They're very predictable, scientific patterned energy. They're not like energy. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. They are like, they shoot, and then when they get automated, they never, maybe this will help. Like a regular thought you have a synaptic gap, and the thought has to jump over it. That all happens in the prefrontal cortex. When it's automated in the subconscious, it's literally like a rope with no gap. You have no choice. It just goes. And so as you're doing step 3 and you're really coming up with the truth, because the truth sets you free, right? All of these scriptures start becoming like not good Instagram quotes anymore. They're like legit how the brain is wired. So you refute it logically, but here's the thing. How something stores in the subconscious is not just logical, but it's also emotional. Thoughts create emotions, and thoughts and emotions combine to become belief, right? And so belief is what just another word for what's in your subconscious. So you have to go after the emotional part as well, like the feelings around that statement as well. We have a process. We'd have to go deep to be able to get into it here, but we want to go after the logical and the emotional, and then we go back to that scripture, think on and continue to think on what is good, true, pure, and lovely. you now have what we call a truth prime. You've written all the truth, both logical and emotional, and now you record it out loud so you have an audible voice and listen to it. So basically, if I could show you what's going on in your brain in this removal process through the mind matrix, is it's like taking a jackhammer to your limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't all disappear at once, but little bit by little bit. I always look at it like a freeway. You just taking a jackhammer to that belief by repeating over and over again what is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so your brain starts going, well, wait a minute. I thought this was an automation. Evidently, she doesn't believe that anymore. And now your brain starts paying attention to what you're repeating. And the more time you put behind that, the more the freeway to that limiting belief, that imposter syndrome, that doubt, all those fears start to crumble in your brain to the point where, and the fancy name for it is synaptic pruning, where that automated line breaks apart so much that a thought can't even jump across it.
Wow.
So you'll have this, and you've probably experienced this too, Rachel, as you kind of moved yourself up the entrepreneurial ladder, that you'll get to a place and you'll go, I remember feeling that. I remember thinking that thought,
Mm-hmm.
but I just have no energy behind that anymore. I can think the thought, but it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's because as we grow, we kind of, and like Damon was saying when he was looking at me, you kind of accidentally, if you keep pushing and you keep going against these limitations and not believing them and believing the future, a lot of 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs accidentally do this without realizing the process behind it. But the great news is you can start, imagine how much faster you're going to grow, how much more results you're going to have, how many more people you can impact if you do it when you just get started, or you do it when you have your first client, and now you don't need them to believe more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
Right now you can actually stop that hamster wheel of the limiting belief boomeranging you back. So that's the big first step. That's the one that you have to be committed to your own self-leadership to say, it is the only thing getting in my way. Am I willing to be the kind of person that removes the only thing that's holding me back? Or am I going to go back to what I've always done and expect a different result? And that is really, I think, the road less traveled. That's why there are fewer 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs than there are struggling, hustling solopreneurs, because we all kind of get to this point and we have to say, like, do I want what God is calling me to enough to feel the resistance and do the leadership, the self-leadership, and learn how to do it in a way that allows me to catapult? Or am I going to stay with what is safe and familiar and hope I can just do it? And unfortunately, from the brain-based perspective, that's why you feel like you're constantly taking one step forward and 2 steps back. So I know you and I've had a lot of conversations about this from a mindset perspective. That 7-figure mindset requires just a slowing down to speed up, a commitment to the one thing that will change it all versus the thousands of things that the gurus are selling you that is only going to distract you from your future. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
How is this process different than like what the new age is telling you?
Yeah, we were talking before about that. And I love that you asked this question because, you know, everything that I hear from kind of the woo world or the new age world is all based on the person, the self being the God.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come from that perspective, it sounds great. Like, you know, being the manifester that like vibrates at the certain high frequency. Now, what they've tapped into not knowing is why God tells you to think and keep on thinking on what is good and true and pure and lovely, not because they're the God that can manifest that, but because the God of the universe has actually created in our brain a higher frequency thought pattern when you are thinking on what is good, true, pure, and lovely versus when you are thinking about fear and those basal primal emotions. And so this isn't woo, it's science, but yet just like accidentally tripping into, oh, man, I can manifest that way. Here's the thing. They're banking on using a neurochemical called willpower to try enough to be the God of your life to make manifestation happen or to make seeking abundance happen. Or like, I don't know if you have other ones that like you kind of think of in terms of, those are the two big ones where you run out of that willpower within 72 to 120 hours. So I think God in his infinite wisdom did that on purpose so that we would realize he is God, we are not. And so when you think of the new age world, every road leads back to the individual being the most supreme and the most powerful. And that feels great for about 120 days. And then all of a sudden it all breaks up. And that's why people have even if they're not believers, and I hope they're not, but if they're not believers, they feel like this love-hate relationship with the new age. It feels good when you're doing it because of pride and ego. Pride and ego says, I can do this. I don't need help. I can manifest. I can create. I can. And yes, you've been given the ability to create. Yes, you can tap into higher frequencies in the brain, but you can't sustain it if you are being God, because the energy will run out. And then it just like I said, it's like layering wet blankets on top of a very moldy thing. That moldy thing is still there. That sin is still there. That pride and that ego is still there. And so if you notice a lot of the new age techniques, they really focus on feeling a certain way in the moment. Because if they can get you hooked to letting your feelings be the supreme leader in your life, then you'll have to follow those particular gurus forever. Get to continually chase that feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think God he created us with the brain and the system of the brain for success and for worshiping him and for stepping into our full calling. And baked into that is an authority coming from him giving you the power, him giving you this system that fires 90% of the time toward what you want when you tap into it. When you use counterfeit systems, they do make you feel good in the moment. But unfortunately, that feeling runs out and leaves you chasing the next and the next and the next. And that's exactly why scripture says the love of something other than God, whether it be money or pride or ego, these things in the brain never fully allow you freedom. And it keeps you attached to being God yourself, chasing the feelings, and not actually getting those results. And it's a heartbreak. It was a world I was in prior to giving my life to the Lord. And it's not a world about others. It's not a world that wants to create in the world for others. It's a very egocentric, I got to feel good in the moment about me. And if you think about that, that's what every single person that has come, including Satan, that has come against the Lord has always wanted to be God. And so I believe it is the ultimate counterfeit, right? Because the counterfeit says, I feel good, so it must be good. But at the end, it creates death because you are literally leaning into your own ego and your own pride to prop it up versus getting all the power and all the peace and all the freedom that comes from using the very physiology and systems that God created to support you in complete freedom, like inevitable success, where you don't have to try harder and use willpower and use all of those secondary resources to try to get a result. And so I get it. I did it. So I get it. That desire to do something fast, that desire to not, to not follow God, but to follow our own feelings, is attractive. But at the end, it just leads to a hollow place because it isn't supported by how we're truly wired.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
so good. I feel like we could talk for like 4 hours.
I know.
But I know like we got stuff to do. So you have a challenge coming up for people that want more and go deeper. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm so excited about this live event where it's a video series and a live event challenge where we're going to teach you how to think 7 figures. We call it the Unleashed Entrepreneur live event, and we're breaking down for you how a 7 and 8 figure entrepreneur thinks in the 5 big levers that grow your business, and how to train your brain to think like them. So that, and it's just based on this premise that's in scripture too, how like if you are thinking like a 7 figure entrepreneur, how much faster are you going to get to 6 figures, right? So I believe that God has potential, and honestly, it is your birthright, it's your calling to get into those higher levels so that you can impact more people. And so we really want to teach you how to do the linchpin thing, the one thing that makes all the difference. You can actually learn the skill of a 7-figure mindset, and that's what we're going to be teaching.
Awesome. We'll put the link in the description. It'll probably be rachelandgom.com/Shannon, so you can register. I'm excited that you're putting that on, so thank you.
And I'm excited about it too.
Yes. What's one of the best books you've read?
Oh goodness, so many. Right now, I'm all back into the business world again because we're really trying to push our business growth. So I'm reading Alex Hormozi's new, 100 million leads.
Oh, he's good.
He's so good. One of the generosity. I always love seeing entrepreneurs that are just really, really generous, and seeing how God blesses that, because that's God's heart. So it's so fun to watch that. Gosh, you kind of caught me off guard with that question. I love it.
I see all the books behind you and I'm like, oh, I
So
got
many.
that one, got that one, got that one.
Yeah, right? You're so good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.